Trump has federalized the Washington, D.C. police force and called up the National Guard. Federal police officers, like from FBI and ICE, etc., in D.C., assisting in officers in locking down crime in D.C. Why is this happening? Why are Democrats reacting the way they are? There is a surface level of component to what we see, and then there's a deeper level aspect to this that won't be as obvious. So let's get to the bookkeeping stuff. Washington, D.C. is constitutionally different from any other square inch of land in the U.S. The Constitution directly mandates that Congress controls this district, which is made up primarily of Washington City, Alexandria, and Georgetown. In fact, in terms of permissibility, it's actually the only land the federal government is legally allowed to own. But that's a whole different story. The style of the local government, if any, is entirely up to Congress. At points in history, they have been directly governed by Congress. At some points, they were run by governors appointed by the president, in some cases run by councils that were made up of mixes of appointed and locally elected officials. In fact, the current mayor and city council configuration has only been in place since 1973. By current law, the president can federalize the DC police force on his own for 30 days, and such federalization can be extended by Congress. Federal level enforcement officers can be used there because this is federal territory. They don't need permission from some other entity to be there, as being in the other states. Now, there were a few extra hoops that need to be jumped through to get the National Guard, but clearly those officials have signed off as well. So, for those people out there trying to pretend DC is a regular town with local control and is just like the city of Springfield that happens to be in your state, they're wrong. And those who are saying the president can't do this are also wrong. Under the current law, the same one President Trump is using, President Clinton took control of the DC police and actually large chunks of the rest of the DC government from 1995 through the rest of his term. Now, part of this is just Trump keeping up the momentum. Keep making things happen, keep forcing the Democrats to react to them. It's part of the continuation of prepping the battlefield for the midterm elections. The GOP is doing something about crime, while the Democrats are whinging about some obscure DEI talking points. Now, the odds of something going horribly wrong with this whole DC takeover for Trump is nearly zero. If very little comes of this, I mean, like, let's say there's no major improvement when it's all done, well, the act of trying to be tough on crime is a win for the GOP, and any Democrats who make some hideous gaffe while making a soundbite over this will have it used against them. Now, if for some reason this turns into a major success, it's one that's bought relatively cheaply. So the point of this is there's virtually no downside for Trump to take this action. The only people who are going to get upset at this are people who are never going to vote for a Republican in the first place. So here's where it starts to get fun. The Democrats are stepping up to oppose this publicly, when really the smartest course of action would be to ignore it so that it disappears from the news cycle. However, it's not just the run-of-the-mill crazies who are opposing this. Pushback is coming from deep within the Democratic establishment. Money is pouring in from NGOs and open society groups to pay for rented protesters. Apparently, some $20 million has already been spent. Why would they do this? Well, because there are deeper implications of this that go far beyond Washington, D.C. Now, I need to throw in a quick digression to give you something to compare against. And we're going to talk a little bit about the border. Now, regardless if you think it was a problem or not, there were millions of people crossing the border since at least the 1990s. And whatever number crossed before Biden's administration had a clear dramatic increase during the Biden administration. So, for pretty much decades, we were told there was almost nothing that could be done to stop this, short of passing various multi thousand page bills. And while at the same time, the same people calling for those bills would say, well, and even that won't work, so something, give amnesty to all the illegals currently here. Then Trump seemingly shut down the border by merely giving orders and putting the right people in the right places. Now, even if you think that essentially they're saying the got away crossings are down to near zero and occasionally at zero, so even if you think these numbers are exaggerated, clearly you have to admit they're way down from where they were before. So if we look at what was happening before and what was happening now, it's become clear that the previous problem wasn't one anyone wanted to fix. So it's very apparent. Many people who were saying it couldn't be done lost a great deal of credibility for it. So let's say for fun that Trump ends up hitting a home run and is able to turn DC into some kind of model city. The implications of that could be foundation shaking, and this would explain why the various NGOs and open society foundations are kicking all this money at this. Almost every city of size in America is Democrat run. Almost all of them are crime ridden hellholes. Now, some wise guy will try to pull the actually, statistics say. I guarantee you that trying to argue crime is statistically down, even if it is, will be as easy and effective as arguing that the economy was doing great under Biden. People believe crime is bad. No army of experts with numbers will be able to propagandize that perception away. I suspect that once Washington ends up in a place where people see a difference, again, assuming Trump hits some kind of home run here, Trump will then offer assistance to any other big city that requests it. And that puts city governments in the awkward position of arguing that everything is great and we don't need help when a lot of the cities clearly are having problems. So it'll be kind of like the border where they're saying, "Oh, no, this isn't really happening, and even if it is happening, there's nothing that can be done about it except for what happened in DC, which doesn't count." Or the alternate is if they do say, "Well, hey, Trump, yeah, do some kind of help for us." Well, then they're pretty much saying we're incompetent, come bail us out. Now, there is an outlier chance that Trump's Justice Department may go after cities for failing to secure the civil rights of their constituents because they refuse to address crime. Or, in other words, if DC turns into this model city, essentially the Justice Department can say, hey, look, before this, the victims, the general citizenry of the city who aren't causing the crime have had their civil rights violated because the cities have been refusing to enforce criminal statutes. If they can pull that off by having the comparison of the before and after, they can start suing the other cities saying, hey, if you don't get rid of moneyless bail, if you don't get rid of all these other things you've implemented over the last 10 years, you're violating other people's civil rights because you're enabling criminals to go after them. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but I see that as a possibility. So this is kind of a trap. Why are Democrats walking into this trap? Well, because the stakes are a lot higher than just the number of criminals in each city. The first big issue is DEI. DEI rests on the idea that any place there is a disparity in racial outcomes, the source is racism. Since black people are disproportionately arrested and convicted as compared to the percentage of population, DEI says it's a clear sign of racism. And on a certain level, it might be. But the response to solve this inequity has been to stop arresting quality of life crimes, eliminate bails, basically just allow people out with no bail, or they're called cashless bails, tossing out first time charges or even violent crimes, reduce sentencing, early paroles. The fact this increases crime is irrelevant as far as DEI is concerned, because DEI is only looking at the impact on the criminals and not the victims of the crime. This has the potential to put DEI in even more in the crosshairs than it already has been. The cities are right now the remaining DEI citadels. As DEI is being pushed back across the countryside, it's retreating into the fortresses of the Democrat cities. So, why would it be bad for Democrats if DEI got torpedoed? Well, in the long run, it probably would help them, but in the short run, no. Multiple issues here. First, Democrats have sunk a lot of their identity into this concept since the early 2000s. This will force, if DEI is broken, it will force a generational change on the party, for which there are huge time expenses to overcome. This means that the Democratic Party could be set back for 5, 10, even 20 years if they have to come up with a new model, new branding. There is also a large industry that employs many Democrats that are dependent on this. If they lose their jobs, they lose their ability to assist cities in governing the way they want. Also, there are many NGOs dedicated to the DEI narrative that act as informational proxies for the Democrat Party. So even though they are pushing particular issues, they're pushing issues that only mean something to the Democrat Party. Also, DEI has been the wild card that neo-Marxists have been holding on to since the 60s. Pull this card out of their hand, and they pretty much have nothing left. They have to go back to square one trying to foment class conflict. The next problem is that no large city is actually run by the visible government. Entirely, I mean. If you look at what the city government on its own does versus what actually either needs to get done or actually does get done, you then have to realize that there are a lot of non-governmental entities out there functioning to help govern these cities. There are many nonprofits that work as part of the bureaucratic infrastructure of the cities. Some of these operate as consulting firms, charitable organizations, informational organizations. And a lot of times, money between the city coffers and these organizations are pretty much direct lines. Because so much of what the city does is farmed out to all these formal and informal groups, it leads to a lot of graft and corruption. This is just something we've understood about big cities for a long time. Now, some of this just ends up lining people's pockets, people taking their cut and going their way. But actually, a lot of it ends up in organizations that act as proxies to the Democratic Party. So, too much light getting shown on how this works, or if they are forced to reorganize from the outside, this could have devastating impacts on city political machines. But it's not just the cities that the Democratic Party machines service. They are also the backbone of the National Party and national campaigns. Money, manpower, and votes generated by the big cities also back congressional and presidential efforts. So, depending on how this plays out, It could be as little as a bump for the GOP's midterm efforts. However, if it goes way south, it could easily turn into an existential crisis for the Democratic Party itself. And I just wanted to quick mention this last image I pulled up here. This is a old political cartoon depicting the big city political machines. And in all honesty, very little has changed. It's just we're less aware of it because it's not reported on. So, what do you think? Tell me in the comments below. Uh, for or against this idea of trying to get DC in order? Do you think it'll be successful? Is there a huge downside I've missed? Do you think this ends up having shockwaves beyond DC? Does it end up being uh, the hit that goes flying over the far wall? Let me know in the comments below. Please smash the like button. If you have not seen my content before, check out my other titles. You're bound to find a whole bunch of stuff you would find interesting. Please subscribe to the channel to get at future stuff I put out. And if you know someone who might like this, please share it with them. Thank you for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.